how many people would be suddenly out of work? You probably can count on your own hands several people that you know that would suddenly be out of work. So that is not a very restrictive category of licensure. I never complained about CPAs. I never fought to reduce their capacity or anything like that in my advocacy, because it is not so restrictive. On the other hand, a very restrictive form of occupational license is cosmetology. Cosmetology, which has been in Missouri since 1929, is very restrictive. The law even says if you shampoo, although there's no separate license for shampooing, if you cleanse somebody's hair, if you clean their fingernails, if you cut their nails, you're violating the law. Now, the Attorney General is not running around trying to put people in jail. It's not being pursued, but it is under the law in cosmetology. You can't practice cosmetology for a fee, for compensation, which includes those numerous things, and every hospital and every nursing home in the state violates the law every day because they certainly wash people's hair. But there's more. It's so restrictive that it prevents other people from working. Hair braiders, you've heard, if you've been on this committee a long time, you've heard about African hair braiders who not 1 minute of the instruction in the schools is toward African hair braiding, yet they must spend 1,500 hours in getting that cosmetology license to practice. So those two examples. If you didn't have to eliminate the license for cosmetology, just restricted it or certified it or something like that, but allowed people to go to work, it would improve job opportunities. In Missouri, on January the 1st, to give you some statistics, in Missouri, at January 1st, there were some 31,000 licensed cosmetologists in the state. Pretty good number. There were 3,325 students in school. About 10% might be what you'd expect. But because of the restrictive requirements in cosmetology for apprenticeships, in other words, if somebody wants to have an apprentice on their working for them in cosmetology, they got to go back to school. They got to do more things. There's so many restrictions on apprenticeships. There's only 86 apprentices in the state of Missouri. What if suddenly we took carpentry and said you have to be a licensed carpenter, and if you're an apprentice, you have to be a licensed apprentice like you would for cosmetology? I predict there'd be a lot of carpenters that are just entering the profession out of work today. So it's not just the categories of restrictive occupational regulations like certification, registration, licensing. Often within the category of itself, by definition of what the work is that can be done with or without a license, it becomes very, very restrictive. That concludes my testimony. I hope this bill will help you do your job. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you. Any other testimony in support of HB 1824? Seeing none.
I do have someone from the Show Me Institute to Skype.
Oh, I could.
Let me do the Skype and then we'll.
Okay, great. I won't preempt Mr. Stokes.
That's the mic on there. Should I start talking, Representative? I'll just begin now. My name is David Stokes. I'm with the Show Me Institute. Should I continue? Is this good? Thank you. I'm delighted to be testifying here on House Bill 1824. I'm sorry I can't be there in person to address the committee. I think that this is an excellent bill that will pass some important changes on to Missouri. I'm going to be very brief. I've passed out copies of the testimony to the committee, and we've also posted it online. With that in mind, I'm just going to speak for a minute about some key ideas, I think, in the testimony. This bill does two major things. One, it makes it harder to impose occupational licensing in Missouri, and I think there are certainly examples of certain occupations that don't require occupational licensing. And when you say that, people think you're insulting those occupations, and you're not doing so at all. But I think it should be more difficult than it is to just take an occupation and impose licensing requirements on there. And to give two examples, both interior designers and massage therapists have national organizations where the primary point of those organizations is to go from state to state and seek tighter licensing for the fundamental fact that those occupations will restrict competition and have higher salaries because of it. There's nothing wrong with those occupations getting higher salaries, but I think the use of licensing in order to accomplish that is the wrong way to go about doing it. And I think the idea proposed in the bill that educational requirements, you can't just say that you're going to add them. Now in the future you're going to need some type of evidence that additional educational requirements benefit the public and are truly needed, and I think that's a terrific addition in the bill. My other primary comment is I appreciate in the bill how it states that if you're going to license a certain occupation because you've demonstrated that there's a public good that can come from that you have, the assumption is that you will start licensing it at the lower levels instead of going straight to the highest and most restrictive level of licensure. And one brief example I'm going to give is taxi cabs. And I know that's not a state licensed occupation, it's licensed at the local level, but it's still something that we all understand and can appreciate. We all agree that some level of taxi cab licensure is necessary. Strangers are meeting and getting into cars. There should be, for public safety purposes, license numbers on those cabs. The amount of the fare should be publicly printed out there. So some level of registration with local government for somebody engaging in taxi cabs, I think, is perfectly reasonable. But most cities go from a simple registration to accomplish a public safety goal to all-out licensures with things such as certificate of convenience and necessity and uniforms for drivers and rules on what types of cars and can and can't be used, and go way farther than necessary to protect the public good for taxi cabs. So I think where 1824 requires that lower levels of licensures be imposed first, in order to attempt to accomplish the public good without such serious impediments, I think that's another excellent part of House Bill 1824. The rest of my comments are in the written testimony that I've submitted, and I'd be delighted to take any questions.
I can type.
I'll say you're going to have to type those. If there are questions, Eric will have to type those. Are there any questions for this witness? Seeing none. Other testimony in support of HB 1824.
Hi there. I'm Steve Spellman from Boone County. Glad to be here today. I'm Steve Spellman from Boone County today. Didn't intend to speak here today, but was here for another event and heard about this bill, and it really sounds like good governance. I work in the professional services field, and just thinking about my own career path, went to the University of Missouri Business School, actually worked in the IT area, and then worked along the way. I've been a trust officer about the last 10 years. And there's not a great deal of professional licensing and certification that's in that field, but certainly bank regulations take care of a lot of that stuff. But my heart goes out to many of the blue-collar folks in many of the professions. My younger brother, we wear a different uniform, let's say. He works with his hands, and that's what he's good at, and I'm glad that he does those things. He's more talented in those areas. But I hit a deer with my car the other night. Live out in rural Boone County, northern Boone County, and there's a lot of woods, and it happens this time of year. And so I was asking a friend of mine about a good body guy. The guy does body work and so forth. And I didn't look about certifications or professional designations or what kind of auto shop. I wanted somebody that was good and honest and would do it for a good price. So I asked a friend of mine and found out this guy and learned a little bit about his story. And, just thinking if, I know that auto mechanics sometimes that maybe has come before this board, been a proposal I think I've heard in the past, or things like that. But this fellow, he, I don't think has a lot of professional advanced secondary education, but worked at a local auto parts store, got into the paint profession, seems to know his stuff, and maybe he has and on the side, he now does some body work, kind of moonlights this way, and that's good enough for me because a good friend of mine recommended him. But just thinking if auto mechanics or body shop work and that sort of thing came before this committee in the future, I think if you had this framework to really think through how does that work? Is it really in the public interest to really limit that a lot? It's not exactly like a medical profession. I think that's good to mention that that's kind of in another league. There is a case for having licensure and things like that on that. But just thinking about this guy's job opportunities, maybe he wants to open his own shop someday, break open away from working in O'Reilly's. Maybe that's what he wants to do with his future. Maybe he wants to go out on his own. But these hurdles that was in the video, I mean, that's real. I see that with real people that I know in my community. And I think this sounds like a good bill. It doesn't seem to, whether there should be more or less licensing or what have you, but just a framework. Again, there's a lot of high-minded stuff from some very smart people, and highly recommend InstituteForJusticeIJ.org. These wonderful things. I'm talking about some of the things that I talked about there a minute ago, but really this does affect real people, and I think would really help taking some of this high-minded stuff and really having a framework for you all that really work in the real world day to day, dealing with legislation coming through. So thanks for the opportunity to speak today. Thank you for your service.
Questions for this witness?